In the dying embers of the Second World War, when the skies of Europe burned with fire and smoke, one weapon could have changed everything. A machine so far ahead of its time that it terrified even its own creators. This is the story of the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, and how one man's obsession destroyed its chance to rewrite history. The year was 1943. Germany still believed it could win. Its armies were retreating on all fronts, but Hitler's faith in secret wonder weapons, the Wunderwaffe, kept the illusion alive. Deep inside the Messerschmitt factories, engineers led by Willy Messerschmitt and chief designer Hans von Ohain were perfecting a revolutionary concept, a fighter powered not by propellers, but by pure jet thrust. The idea was born years earlier, in the 1930s, when a young German physicist named Hans von Ohain proposed that a jet engine could compress air, ignite fuel, and produce thrust more efficiently than any piston engine ever could. The concept was radical, dismissed by most as fantasy, but Germany's hunger for innovation turned that fantasy into metal. By 1942, the prototype took to the skies. Test pilots who flew it came back shaken. They had never experienced such speed. At 540 miles per hour, the Me-262 could outrun any Allied aircraft by more than 100 miles per hour. Its twin Junkers Jumo-00 engines screamed like banshees, tearing through the cloud with a sound that seemed almost unearthly. It was faster, deadlier, and more advanced than anything the world had ever seen. The Allies still relied on piston engines. The Germans had built the future. But inside the Reich, not everyone shared the same vision. The Luftwaffe's leadership, including General Adolf Galland, one of Germany's top fighter aces, knew exactly what the Me-262 could do. They saw it as the perfect interceptor, a weapon that could defend Germany against the relentless Allied bombing campaigns destroying their cities. To Galland, the jet was salvation. To Hitler, it was something else entirely. In early 1944, the Führer summoned his generals to the Wolf's Lair. He had seen a demonstration of the Me-262 and was impressed, too impressed. In that moment, Hitler made a decision that would doom the jet and possibly the entire Luftwaffe. He declared, "This aircraft must be a blitz bomber, a fighter bomber to strike terror into the enemy's heart." The generals were stunned. A bomber? The Me-262 was never designed to carry bombs. It was too fast, too light, too delicate for that role. But Hitler's word was law. The engineers were ordered to redesign the aircraft, fitting it with bomb racks and altering its center of gravity. That single command, born of arrogance and desperation, would cripple the project for months. By mid-1944, as Allied bombers darkened the skies over Germany, hundreds of nearly finished Me-262s sat idle in hangars. Engines were failing, production was delayed, and the front lines were collapsing. The Luftwaffe begged to deploy the fighter version immediately, to intercept the bombers that were turning German cities into ash. But Hitler refused. He wanted an offensive weapon, not a defensive one. The irony was brutal. The very machine that could have saved Germany's air force was grounded by the man who claimed to lead it. Meanwhile, the Allies were closing in. Their bombing runs targeted the Messerschmitt plants at Augsburg and Regensburg, destroying assembly lines, crippling fuel supplies, and scattering engineers. Each raid delayed production further. By the time Hitler finally relented and allowed the fighter variant to enter service, it was too late. The war was already lost in the air. Yet for those who did fly it, the Me-262 was a revelation. Pilots described the experience as flying the future. It could dive faster than any Allied plane could follow. Its 430mm cannons shredded bombers with terrifying precision. When it appeared in combat for the first time in mid-1944, Allied pilots were shocked. Reports flooded in of silver birds that appeared out of nowhere and vanished before anyone could react. Even experienced fighter aces admitted they had no answer to its speed. But there were problems, serious ones. The Jumo-004 engines were fragile. Each engine lasted barely 25 hours before needing replacement. The scarcity of high-temperature metals meant parts would melt, turbine blades would crack, and maintenance crews were overwhelmed. And worse, when Me-262s took off or landed, they were slow and vulnerable. Allied P-51 Mustangs waited near airfields, ambushing them as they returned. The sky had become a deadly game of timing and technology. Still, the jet terrified the Allies. British and American intelligence agencies scrambled to understand it. Was this the start of a new air age? Could the Nazis be hiding hundreds of these machines, ready to strike at once? The fear was real, and in that fear lay the ultimate irony. Germany had built the future of air combat, but had no time left to use it. As 1944 turned into 1945, the Luftwaffe's once glorious air arm was collapsing. Fuel shortages grounded entire squadrons. Young, inexperienced pilots were sent into the skies against overwhelming odds. Even with superior technology, they were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. And as Allied tanks rolled toward Berlin, the Me-262s that did take to the air became symbols of both genius and tragedy, the final spark of a dying empire. But how close was Germany, really, to changing the course of the war? Could the Me-262, deployed just months earlier, have stopped the Allied bombing campaign and prolonged the conflict? And how did Hitler's interference not only sabotage the jet, but destroy the faith of his own generals? That's where the story turns darker. The year was 1944. All across Europe, the Reich was burning. Cities lay in ruins, rail lines were torn apart, and the Allies owned the skies. Yet, deep inside Hitler's war rooms, he still believed in miracles. He called them Wunderwaffe, the wonder weapons that would save Germany at the last moment. And the Messerschmitt Me-262 was supposed to be the crown jewel of that miracle. But instead of salvation, it became a symbol of Hitler's blindness. When test flights proved the jet's unbelievable speed, Luftwaffe generals like Adolf Galland and Walter Nautny begged for immediate mass production. They wanted squadrons of Me-262s ready to intercept Allied bombers before Germany's cities disappeared completely. The logic was clear: defend the homeland, save the Reich. But Hitler didn't see defense as glory. He saw it as weakness. He wanted vengeance, to strike fear into London, to make the enemy bleed. So, against every expert's advice, he issued the fatal command: the Me-262 shall not be used as a fighter. It will be a bomber, a blitz bomber. That sentence killed months of progress. Designers at Messerschmitt scrambled to follow orders. They tore apart blueprints, added bomb racks beneath the sleek fuselage, shifted the aircraft's balance, rewired the control systems. Every modification slowed it down and made it unstable. Engineers protested. Mein Führer, this aircraft cannot carry bombs. But no one dared to challenge him again. The result was a nightmare. The modified jets were heavy, inaccurate, and useless as bombers. They could carry only a single 250-kilogram bomb, barely enough to dent a bridge. Meanwhile, Allied bombers reduced German industry to rubble. In one stroke of pride, Hitler had turned the fastest fighter in the world into a flying mistake. Inside the Luftwaffe, frustration turned to quiet rebellion. General Galland, a national hero with more than 100 aerial victories, openly defied Hitler's order. He argued that every Me-262 kept on the ground was another German city destroyed. His argument fell on deaf ears. By the summer of 1944, Galland's frustration boiled over. He began forming a secret plan, a squadron that would fly the Me-262 the way it was meant to be flown, as a pure interceptor. He called it Jagdverband 44, Fighter Wing 44, a unit of Germany's best surviving aces, men who no longer believed in Hitler, but still believed in honor. They trained in secret, flying when they could, repairing what they had. Their motto would soon become legendary: against everyone and everything. But while Galland was preparing his silent rebellion, another hero was dying in the sky. Major Walter Nautny, one of Germany's youngest jet aces, was ordered to lead the first Me-262 combat unit. He begged for more training time. The engines were unreliable, the tactics untested, but Hitler wanted a victory headline. On November 8, 1944, Nowotny took off from Akmer Airfield with Allied fighters already hunting him. Minutes later, his jet was seen trailing smoke. He radioed, "I'm going down, engine failure," and crashed into a field near Ape. He was 23 years old. Hitler turned his death into propaganda. But among pilots, it became a symbol of what the Führer's interference had cost them. Not just machines, but lives. Even as the situation worsened, production of the Me-262 lagged behind. Each jet required over 6,000 man-hours to assemble. Factories were bombed repeatedly, supply chains collapsed, and Germany's dwindling fuel reserves made test flights almost impossible. By late 1944, only a handful of jets were combat-ready. The irony was brutal. Germany had a weapon that could outrun and outgun every Allied plane, but not the ticking clock of defeat. Meanwhile, Allied pilots began reporting encounters with the mysterious Stormbird. They described silver flashes slicing through bomber formations, firing short bursts that tore through metal like paper. Then, just as suddenly, the jets would vanish. It was terrifying and thrilling. The Allied command realized they were facing the birth of a new era, the jet age. In London and Washington, military analysts warned that if Germany produced even a few hundred Me-262s, the air war could change overnight. Plans were drawn to destroy every factory and runway associated with the jet. Germany's advantage had turned into a target. Back in Berlin, Hitler was furious. He demanded to know why his Blitz bomber wasn't delivering miracles. When told that only the fighter version was effective, he exploded in rage, accusing his generals of disobedience. He shouted, "You think you know better than I? The enemy will be defeated by attack, not defense." But even as he ranted, the enemy was already above his head. By early 1945, desperation finally forced Hitler to change his mind. He allowed the Me-262 to be used as a fighter, but by then, it was far too late. The Allies were bombing fuel depots daily. The Reich had no gasoline left to fly. Dozens of jets sat useless on airfields, their sleek bodies glinting in the cold winter sun, symbols of lost opportunity. Galland's Fighter Wing 44 finally took to the skies in those final months. In their short existence, they destroyed more than 50 Allied aircraft. But each victory came at an impossible cost. For every jet that returned, 2 were destroyed on the ground, ambushed during takeoff or landing. The skies belonged to the Allies now, no matter how advanced Germany's machines had become. Inside Galland's secret headquarters, morale collapsed. Pilots whispered about the futility of it all, fighting for a regime that had betrayed them, flying a miracle weapon that came too late to matter. Galland himself was soon dismissed after confronting Göring and Hitler face-to-face, accusing them of murdering the Luftwaffe with politics. His words were his last act of defiance. By the time Soviet troops surrounded Berlin, fewer than 300 Me-262s had seen combat. Of those, barely half were operational at any given time. They were magnificent, terrifying, and utterly doomed, much like the empire that built them. The jet's final flights were acts of desperation. Pilots launched missions with almost no fuel, knowing they would not return. Some flew into Allied bomber formations just to buy their comrades a few extra minutes. Others destroyed their aircraft on the ground to keep them from capture. When the last Me-262 lifted off in April 1945, Germany was already collapsing in flames. It was the end of a dream and the start of a legend. Because after the war, the Me-262 didn't die. It was reborn in American, British, and Soviet laboratories. Its design would become the blueprint for the next generation of jet fighters, shaping the entire Cold War that followed. But for the men who built and flew it, the memory remained bittersweet. They had touched the future, only to watch it vanish into history's smoke. When the guns of Europe finally fell silent in May 1945, the ruins of the Third Reich stretched across a continent. But amid the ashes, The victors were searching for something far more valuable than territory. They were searching for secrets. Because deep in the wreckage of Germany's war machine lay the blueprints of a new age. The Jet Age. In hangars scattered across Bavaria and Austria, Allied soldiers found machines that looked like they belonged to another century. Sleek silver bodies, swept wings, engines unlike anything they had ever seen. Most had been destroyed by retreating German crews, but enough remained to tell the truth. Germany had built the world's first operational jet fighter, and they had done it years before anyone else. To the Allied engineers who examined the wreckage, it was like discovering alien technology. The Me-262's Junkers Jumo 004 engines, its aerodynamics, even the placement of its cannons. Everything was decades ahead of the rest of the world. The question was simple. How had the Nazis done it? And more importantly, what else had they been hiding? The British, Americans, and Soviets each launched secret operations to seize as much German science as they could. They called it Operation Lusty, Luftwaffe's secret technology. Its goal: capture every jet, every scientist, and every scrap of paper that could explain how the Me-262 worked. Teams of engineers and intelligence officers fanned out across Germany, following whispers and rumors. They found prototypes of jet bombers, rocket interceptors, and even plans for flying wings, designs that looked eerily like the stealth aircraft of the 21st century. In one abandoned airfield, American troops discovered a row of Me-262s intact, hidden under camouflage nets. Their pilots had surrendered hours earlier. The Americans couldn't believe what they were seeing. The future of aviation, built by the enemy they had just defeated. Those jets were quickly crated, loaded on C-47 transports, and flown to Britain and the United States for study. What followed was one of the greatest technological transfers in history. At Wright Field, Ohio, American engineers began disassembling the Me-262 piece by piece. They studied its engines, its alloys, even its cockpit layout. Soon, they realized that nearly every idea inside it could be adapted for the U.S. Air Force. The result was the birth of aircraft like the Bell X-1 and the F-86 Sabre, planes that would dominate the skies in the decade to come. Meanwhile, the British were not far behind. The Royal Aircraft Establishment took their own captured jets to Farnborough for analysis. Frank Whittle, the inventor of the British jet engine, reportedly stood silent as he examined the German design, realizing that, in some ways, the Germans had outpaced his own work. The Me-262's axial flow engine concept became the foundation for the British Rolls-Royce Avon, powering a new generation of fighters. The Soviets, too, were racing for the spoils. They seized factories, captured engineers, and transported entire design teams eastward. Among them was Dr. Hans von Ohain, one of the original pioneers of the jet engine. His research would later influence the development of the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG series, beginning with the MiG-9, the USSR's first jet fighter. As the Cold War dawned, the world's air forces stood on the shoulders of Nazi science. It was an uncomfortable truth. The same nation that unleashed destruction had also unleashed the future. But for many Allied commanders, there was a haunting realization. If Hitler had allowed full production of the Me-262 even 6 months earlier, the war might have looked very different. Germany's cities might have stood longer. The D-Day invasion could have been delayed. Thousands, maybe millions, more lives could have been lost. It was one of history's closest brushes with a nightmare. In Washington, the reports from Operation Lusty painted a chilling picture. A U.S. Air Force memo from 1946 stated, "Had this aircraft been available in sufficient numbers, the air superiority enjoyed by the Allies in 1944-45 could not have been maintained." British test pilot Eric Brown, who flew captured Me-262s, said it best. This was the most formidable aircraft of World War II. Had it come earlier, we might have lost the skies. Yet, behind those cold assessments lay another layer of irony. The Germans themselves had been their own worst enemy. Even without Hitler's interference, the Me-262 project was burdened by chaos. Germany's industry was collapsing, resources were vanishing, and sabotage by slave labor was rampant. The brilliance of the jet was born in a system that could no longer sustain it. In many ways, the Me-262 was a reflection of the Reich itself. Powerful, terrifying, but doomed by arrogance and disorder. When Allied engineers flew the captured jets for the first time, they marveled at their elegance but also their fragility. The engines failed often, fuel lines leaked, and the controls were dangerously unstable at low speeds. It was clear that the Me-262 wasn't perfect. It was a prototype rushed into combat by a desperate regime. But it was enough to change everything. The war had ended before the technology matured, but the knowledge wouldn't die with it. It spread like wildfire across laboratories, across continents, across ideologies. Within just 5 years, the same nations that had fought each other were now building fleets of jet aircraft that could break the sound barrier. The Me-262 had done more than just fly. It had launched humanity into a new age of warfare. From the ashes of one empire's downfall, the future of every air force on Earth was born. And as the 1950s began, a haunting truth settled over the world's militaries. The next war, if it ever came, would be fought not by propellers, but by the ghosts of German innovation. But the story of the Me-262 didn't end in laboratories or museums. Some of its creators would vanish into obscurity. Others would be hunted for their roles in the Nazi regime. And one of them, the man whose arrogance ruined his own miracle weapon, would meet his final downfall in a bunker beneath Berlin. Berlin, 1945. The heart of the Third Reich is collapsing. Soviet artillery pounds the city without mercy. Streets that once echoed with Nazi parades now burn beneath the thunder of revenge. In the Führer bunker, deep beneath the ruins, Adolf Hitler sits surrounded by maps that no longer matter. Outside, his empire is dying, but inside, he still clings to delusion. His generals beg for reason, for strategy, for any plan that could save the last remnants of Germany. But Hitler's mind is fixed on a single obsession, the Me-262 jet fighter. To him, the jet is not just a weapon. It's a symbol, proof that Germany still possesses the genius to rise again, even in defeat. He demands that the aircraft be converted into a blitz bomber, capable of carrying bombs to strike Allied positions. Engineers protest, explaining that such a design would destroy its speed advantage. Hitler refuses to listen. He is no longer the strategist of 1939. He is a dictator drowning in fantasy. Every wasted hour turns the Me-262 from a miracle weapon into a ghost. By the time enough jets are ready for combat, it's too late. Fuel is scarce, airfields are destroyed, and the pilots, young boys barely out of flight school, are no match for the veteran swarms of Allied fighters that rule the skies. Yet even in its final moments, the Me-262 shows the world what could have been. On April 9, 1945, a formation of these jets screams through the sky, intercepting American bombers over Munich. In less than 5 minutes, they shoot down 10 B-17s and vanish before the escorting Mustangs can react. It's a glimpse of the future, fast, lethal, untouchable. But victories like that are meaningless. The Reich has no time left. Every bridge, every rail line, every fuel depot lies in ruins. The jets that once promised salvation now sit stranded on cracked runways, their engines silent. The dream of air supremacy dies in the same flames that consume Berlin. Inside the bunker, Hitler receives reports of his wonder weapons. He nods, convinced that miracles are still possible. Even as the Soviets close in, he orders his staff to prepare for counterattacks that will never happen. He speaks of new technologies, V-2 rockets, guided bombs, jet bombers, as if innovation could save him from the inevitable. To his remaining generals, it's madness. They know the truth. The Me-262 could have changed history, but only if it had been unleashed when the skies were still Germany's to command. Now it's too late. The most advanced aircraft in the world belongs to a nation that no longer exists. As the Soviets reached the city center, the last operational Me-262s take off from airfields near Prague. Their mission, a hopeless attempt to delay the Red Army. Many pilots never return. Those who survive surrender their jets to Allied forces, walking away from the aircraft that had once made them feel invincible. In one haunting moment, a Luftwaffe mechanic scribbles on the fuselage of a grounded Me-262. Too late. Two words that summarize an entire war. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler ends his life in the bunker. Outside, the war that he began in arrogance and destruction finally ends in silence. The Me-262, his miracle weapon, survives only as a relic of what might have been. For Germany, it is the end of an era. For the world, it is the beginning of another. Because in the aftermath of the war, nations across the globe raced to claim what Hitler's empire left behind. Not land, not gold, but knowledge. From the ashes of the Third Reich, the jet age is born. The United States and the Soviet Union emerge with new technology, new ambition, and new enemies. And within just 5 years, the world that once fought with propellers is now preparing for supersonic flight. The Me-262 becomes a legend, both a warning and a promise. A warning of how obsession and ego can destroy brilliance, and a promise of how innovation, even born in darkness, can reshape the future. Its engineers vanish into history. Its pilots fade into forgotten archives. But its legacy remains, written in every jet that has taken to the sky since 1945. The Me-262 was not just a weapon. It was a glimpse of tomorrow, seen too soon. And in the end, it proved one eternal truth. Technology may win battles, but only wisdom can win wars.